In the average year, the healthcare industry uses 25 million N95 masks, and we have delivered in this short time 75 million N95 masks, more than 3 times what the healthcare sector uses in a year. That's extraordinary. It's extraordinary that some in the media were saying that we needed 1 million ventilators, and this president has. We've needed far short of that so far. Not a single American has died for lack of a ventilator, and the fact that this president can look the American people in the eye and say, I am producing 100,000 ventilators this year alongside the private sector, 100,000 ventilators, that's 3 times what we produce in the average year. I'd consider that a great success on behalf of the American people.
The president tweeted this morning about the protests in Michigan. He essentially said that the governor of Michigan should work with the protesters. He called them very good people and said that they are very angry. Some of those protests, I'm sure you saw, included heavily armed protesters, members of militia groups. I wonder if the president was speaking about those specific members who stormed the Capitol in Michigan when he talked about very good people.
Look, the president was referencing generally that in this country you have a First Amendment right to protest. I think that's something we all treasure here, and we should, rightfully. You have a right to do that constitutionally, but you must protest within the bounds of the law. He encourages everyone to protest lawfully, and also to engage in our social distancing guidelines, which we think all Americans should engage in.
Do you have any response to just the imagery of people with long guns essentially storming the Capitol, going into face-offs with police officers and intimidating in some way some of the lawmakers?
Again, the president says that we must protest lawfully and act within the bounds of the law.
China's blocking the World Health Organization from coming in and investigating how this started. Shouldn't external investigators be allowed into Wuhan to determine, 1, how the pandemic started, and 2, maybe a way that we could expedite finding a cure for this thing?
Look, there's no secret that China stopped U.S. investigators from coming in. It was of paramount importance that we got into China in an expedited fashion, and that didn't happen. With respect to the World Health Organization, they have some questions of their own to answer. The United States, as the president has emphasized, provides about $400 million to $500 million per year to the WHO, compared to China at roughly $40 million a year. But yet the WHO appears to have a very clear China bias. I mean, you look at this timeline, and it's really damning for the WHO when you consider the fact that on December 31st, you had Taiwanese officials warning about human-to-human transmission. The WHO did not make that public. On January 9th, the WHO repeated China's claim that the virus, quote, does not transmit readily between people. That was quite apparently false. On January 14th, the WHO again repeated China's talking points about no human-to-human transmission. They praised China's leadership on the 22nd of January. On the 23rd, they said, and this is incredible, the pandemic didn't represent a public health emergency of international concern. And even on February 29th, you had the WHO saying that when the coronavirus was spreading around the world, they chose to put political correctness first by opposing life-saving travel restrictions. The travel restrictions this president put in place, the travel restrictions that Dr. Fauci praised as saving lives. And you have the World Health Organization opposing a measure that saved American lives. That's unacceptable, especially at a time when the U.S. was providing $400 to $500 million. I think it was a grave miscarriage of justice, what happened with Justice Brett Kavanaugh. There's no need for me to bring up some of the salacious, awful, and verifiably false allegations that were made against Justice Kavanaugh. That was an embarrassment for the Democrat Party to have dragged the name of a very respectable man through the mud like that. So I'll leave it at that.
When the president fired Michael Flynn, he said he was doing so because he had lied to the vice president and he had lied to the FBI. So, given all that you've just said, isn't it still true? Doesn't the president still believe that Michael Flynn lied to Vice President Pence and lied to the FBI?
Well, first, let me address that. Vice President Pence is on the record about this. He said he's inclined to believe that Flynn did not intentionally mislead him. And I guess I would turn the question on you and just ask, does it trouble you that the FBI said, we got to get Flynn to lie? Doesn't that trouble you as a journalist? And not only that, as an American citizen.
Well, it's certainly something worth reporting. It's not my job to say whether or not it's troubling. But the bottom line is the president said point blank that Flynn lied to the FBI and to the vice president. And I'm just asking a very direct question. Does he still believe that Michael Flynn lied to to the FBI and lied to the vice president.
And again, I'd point you to the vice president's statement that he's inclined to believe that Flynn did not intentionally mislead him. And I'm asking back that all of you in your coverage endeavor to report what is a very scary story when the FBI is saying, let us get someone to lie. I've seen very scant coverage of that. It's a story worth reporting and a story that I hope the American people, if you haven't heard it yet, are getting to hear for the very first time. Last year, our brave ICE officers arrested more than 120,000 criminal aliens charged with nearly 10,000 burglaries, 5,000 sexual assaults, 45,000 violent assaults, 2,000 murders, and in the last year, egregiously, 5,000 human trafficking episodes. So American lives matter, our brave ICEmen and women matter, and it's something that he's mentioned he'd like to see in a phase 4.
So the president has in the past denied any of the allegations from the many women who have accused him of sexual misconduct. But per that podcast today, he seemed to suggest the allegations that Tara Reade has raised are more, what did he say, credible than the ones against Brett Kavanaugh. What about the allegations that were raised against him, however? Why should the public, or what makes them any less credible than the allegations from Tara Reade?
The president has swiftly denied all of these allegations that were raised 4 years ago. He has always told the truth on these issues. He's denied them immediately, and you're bringing up issues, like I said, from 4 years ago that were asked and answered, and the American people had their say in the matter when they elected President Trump as president of the United States. But, you know, the media, leave it to the media to really take an issue about the former vice president and turn it on the president and bring up accusations from 4 years ago that were asked and answered in the form of the vote of the American people.
We now have the vice president saying it's his belief that General Flynn may have unintentionally misled him. That's now 3 years after the fact. But the two things that could have been true at the same time were that Flynn lied to the vice president and also lied to the FBI. If you remove the FBI piece of that, would the president still have fired Michael Flynn for his belief that he lied at that point to the vice president?
I mean, I'm not going to engage in a hypothetical, and that's essentially what that would be. But what I would say is echo yet again that this was a grave miscarriage of justice. I am very glad that the FBI thought to keep a paper trail, because what many have said for a very long time, pointing to the first few facts I shared with you, culminating in that handwritten note, I'm glad they kept such good documentation of their intent to slow walk General Flynn into a trap and to essentially create, as I mentioned, a grave miscarriage of justice. So FBI, at least we can thank you for the great note-taking.
Let me follow up on that, though. John does bring up the point that General Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI.
I'm not going to get involved in what was a matter
Miscarriage of justice,
It's-
though, in a sense.
Do you not consider it a miscarriage of justice when you have the FBI writing, we want to get someone to lie? Is that a miscarriage of justice?
But in the end, he pleaded guilty, and then that's...
You hesitated because you know what the answer is. The answer
That's
is
up
yes.
to a lot of other people to
And I would
decide.
encourage the media to cover it, because I've watched a lot of your networks, I've read a lot of your papers, I've seen a whole lot of scant information about Michael Flynn, when there was a whole lot of speculation about Russia, culminating in $40 million of taxpayer money being lost, and the complete and total exoneration of President Trump. Thank you guys so much. I'm gonna cut this short now and go see my little 5-month-old here in a few hours.
Will you pledge never to lie to us from that podium?
I will never lie to you. You have my word on that.